Hey, just a quick note to let you know that this video is a pre-recorded live event. If you'd like to join our upcoming events, such as demos and office hours, you can check out our schedule on our support page. Hope you find this video helpful and look forward to seeing you in our next event. All right, thanks for those joining today's demo live, and welcome to any of you watching this video at a later date. I am super excited about our demo today. I'm going to be sharing the biggest expansion of ZooMonitor to date, and what I'm talking about is our new ZooMonitor Community area. And so we just launched a new area in ZooMonitor in September 2023, and this is our new community area where you can view and join projects being shared across institutions. So you can create large multi-institutional research with lots of animals directly in ZooMonitor. So anyone who's familiar with research in zoos and aquariums knows that one of the biggest challenges we have is getting sufficient sample size. Number of animals that we have is a lot of times limited, and our research, we can be very limited in some of the inferences we can make. And with these new features now, you can use ZooMonitor and really overcome a lot of that barrier. And to me, the super exciting thing is the way this works, as you'll see through the demo, is all of your participants are still recording data within their institutions, within their organization, on their animals, and still learning about their individuals. But their data can now also be getting shared with this large collaborative bigger research study. So you still have your maybe your N of 2 study at your organization, but then your data can also go to contribute to an N of 100 type of study and research. And so super exciting, and I think there'll be a lot of really large, impactful, game-changing research happening here in the community. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the ZooMonitor community and we can get this demo started. Okay, so here we are in the new ZooMonitor community area, and you can see we have a few projects here as of the recording of this video in October 2023. We have a multi-institutional research project on weedy sea dragons, and then there was a project on a giraffe across AZA that I actually led earlier this year. And so for the demo today, what I'm going to be doing is going through the steps to make a new project, and I'm going to use the giraffe project here as kind of a template. So I can just show you to maybe start what this project looks like that we're going to be building. And so this is a project here that we did on giraffe. You can see I clicked open the project. There's different sections here that we're going to be adding when we build this project. There's an overview section, just has some background on the project, a summary, and then you have your project team down here. It was myself and Dr. Katie Cronin. And then you can also add information on methods for your project. I don't have any updates in here, but as you're running your project and you're managing it, you can add updates. I'm not going to be going through that in detail in this video. And then also the activity, who has joined the project. So we had 18 institutions and 9,000 observations recorded on this study. And we have still some growing pains here with some of the graphs that we're still working to iron out. And then you can see some of the organizations that were a part of the study down here. So let's go ahead and jump in to build this community project right here. So you'd think the first step here would be to create a shared study. That makes sense. However, the first step is actually to have a project to share to begin with. So once you have that project to share, then you would go to create the shared study. So let me go back to projects and I can show you. I'm not going to go through all the steps of building a project there, but you can see a project here that I have already created. So this is our IMLS giraffe pilot project. And then you can see basically how I've created this project here. So this is as if you were creating a project completely in your account, nothing different, nothing special about it. The only difference is that you're going to then import this project and the methods that you set up on this project when you create that community study. So the first step here, create the project in your account. You can see we've already got this project here created. And then I have some session questions. I don't have any project materials on here, but certainly I could have added some of those here as well. Okay, so let me go back to the community. So on the left there, you can see the Explore Community section, and we're going to go to Create Shared Study. And so I'm going to be filling out these fields here. So let's give our community, our shared study, a name. So we're going to call it Exploring the Behavior of Giraffe Across AZA Accredited Zoos, a Community Pilot Study. And this is where this first step here, you can see on this first screen, is where it's asking you to import methods for your study. And so these methods are coming from that project I just showed you that's created in your project section in your admin area. Okay, and so our next step here is we're going to be adding a cover image. And so for the cover image, they would need to be a JPEG, PNG. They actually cannot be a GIF file here. So it'd be a JPEG or PNG. And then we do recommend the way it gets formatted in the community site is the 16 by 9 aspect ratio, and ideally larger than 500 pixels to have it look nice and crisp. If you are unfamiliar with how to, if you have a photo and you want to turn it into a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, it's super easy to do actually in Microsoft PowerPoint. And I actually have a guide right here. So if you click that for help, it's just a short document to show you basically how to edit your image and put it in that 16 by 9 aspect ratio to be able to upload here as a cover image. So I already have a image that I have done that to, and so I'm going to be pulling that up here and adding that here. Okay, here I have added our giraffe cover image here. And so it's not going to give you a preview yet, but when you hit save, it'll take a second there to create this new shared project, and then you'll see a preview of what that image that you just added there. And so just like if you're creating a project in your admin area, it's the same sort of steps here for creating a shared community study. You're going to basically go through each of these tabs. And so our first step here is to create our project team. And so you have 2 roles basically for your project team when you're creating a community study. There is the principal investigator, which is the person that is creating the project. So that in this case, that would be myself. And then you can additionally add any investigators to your project. And so this little modal window here kind of explains the differences between both of those. A lot of the different functionality is restricted to just the PI, that principal investigator. And that would be things like editing the project team, adding other people to that area, exporting your data, approving new participants, and closing the project. However, if you do have somebody that's able to help with doing some more of the management of your project, you can add additional investigators here. And so these are people that can add new materials. They can add those updates that I mentioned earlier. But they can't, perform some of those tasks that I just listed. So they're not able to export the data or approve new participants. And so let's go ahead and add, I'll add Katie to this study here. And so we've got our project team set up here. So you can see myself and Katie Cronin. And then there is, now in the community, there is also a profile. So previously, of course, in ZooMonitor, you didn't really have any sort of profile, but in the community, it's really important to be able to share kind of who you are. If people are interested in joining your research project, it's important to kind of have that information available to them to know, who they're collaborating with. And so you have this new profile that you can add. So when you first sign into community, the first steps that you're going to do, it's going to prompt you to set up your profile. And so you'll see that when you first go to that community that first time. You can do it then, or you can always come back and do it at a later point there. And so this is just an example of what my profile looks like here. It just gives some background. You can upload your CV. If you have a LinkedIn profile or an online profile, you can add that in here as well. And then you can also, it'll also list out any projects that you have participated in or led. And so this is the giraffe project that I mentioned earlier that I led And then it also lists your organization, and you can put the URL for your organization too. Okay, so we've got our project team built out. Our next step here is our description. And so there's a few different sort of description fields here. There is this brief description. And so I'm going to copy and paste in a description here, a summary. This is a small description. So earlier when we were looking in the project, there was that little project card. So each project in the community has a little card. There's a button in the bottom right that I'll do after I get through building this project, where you can flip the card to the back and it has this brief description. So if you just want to peek and you don't want to really dive into the project to see more about it, but you just kind of want to read a short description of it, that's on the back of the card there. And so that's what this text here is for. This second section here for the project abstract, this is when you opened the project and actually look at the project. That description there is this project abstract field here. It's really important, of course, with any research, especially multi-institutional research, that you have all of your materials that you're going to need to go through a research committee review. So it's very likely if you're reaching out to multiple institutions or they're reviewing your project and deciding whether they want to join, they're going to need to put your project through a research committee review. That's pretty standard. And so you can add a lot of those materials here directly to your project. And so there's two ways you can go about this. You can, of course, add it here. And then people that are interested in joining your project can download those materials. They can always put it through review. And then if it gets through review and it's approved, then they can join your project or request to join your project. Or you don't have to necessarily add it here, and then they can just reach out if they've been approved to get all those materials to put it through research committee review. So you have some different options there, but certainly I think it's helpful to add all of those materials here if you have them available. So I'm just going to add here our research project proposal. And so I have that here. Go ahead and I'm going to hit save. And you can see that that is now going to show up here in this section for that. You can also add other things. So of course, project proposals, but there may be other things like an IACUC review if your research is more invasive, or if it's involving human subjects, you might have an IRB exemption or an IRB decision letter that you would want to include here. And so you can add all of that here in this section. It's also important, when you're considering multi-institutional research, to think about the animal programs and the SSPs, the tags here in AZA institutions that would be responsible for that species, and reach out to them and introduce yourself, obviously talk about your research project, and possibly they might endorse, if they're interested in supporting that project, they might endorse that project there. And so for the giraffe project, I did reach out to the giraffe SSP and did actually have that project endorsed from them. So I'm going to add that right in here. And so we have a letter of support from the giraffe SSP that I'm adding right here. And the nice thing too about this is that your project, if it is endorsed there, it does actually get a flag, a special flag in the community showing that it is an endorsed project. So if you are looking to join, different multi-institutional research projects that are being created, you would be able to see that and see what some of those high priority projects for the community are for those groups. So we have that in there now. So we have our project proposal. We have our SSP endorsement there. Our next section here is methods. And so, of course, we're going to first start with a name. So I'm going to go with giraffe. And then our scientific name. And then we select a taxa. And so the reason you're selecting a taxa is because we actually have some graphics in the community that are going to count the number of community studies, community projects for the different taxas. So we can see, obviously there's a lot of discussion about understudied, underrepresented species and taxa. And so this will be an easy way for us to track that and to see, what those preferences and biases are in our research efforts. So you just go ahead and hit add species, and you can see it creates this new table down here with that species. The next section here is to give a timeline. So this is the number of months. So this was a 1-year study that I had done. So I'm going to put 12 months. If you have a specific start date and end date for your study, you can add that in here. That is optional. You certainly don't need to do that. For the draft project that I had led, it was more of a rolling start where different institutions kind of came on board at slightly different time points, but everybody recorded 1 year from that time point of when they started. So you can certainly go about that in some different ways. This section here is basically just from the methods of your project that you imported earlier, and this is just a reminder of what the behaviors you have set up are. You're not able to edit those here. So if you do have to make any changes, you have to go back to your project and edit them in the original project, and then you would click sync methods here. So if you did make some mistakes, you can make those edits and click sync methods here. This is all until you publish the project, which I'll get to in a minute. But once you publish the project, you will not be able to make any of those changes at that point. It would be locked. So the next field that we're going to add in here is to give a description of what our observations, how they're going to be conducted, on whom, when, where, all of that information for people that are interested in joining the project. So I have that added in here. An estimated time commitment in the number of hours per week. So this is something that you can see on any of the projects that you're interested in joining. Obviously, this is really important. We know time is a big barrier for a lot of organizations and a lot of teams. And so you can see that right here up front. And then the next section here is is a project requirement. So if you have any special husbandry or housing requirements or research requirements in terms of equipment, you can actually add those here into this section. And that way, when anybody is interested in joining your project, they can see that and know that those requirements are there for your project before they request access to join, so that they can already make sure that they can participate fully in your project. For the draft project, we didn't have any special requirements there, so I'm not going to add anything there. The next section is data analysis, and so of course this is just a brief description of how you plan to analyze your data. And so I have just a short description of basically some basic analysis that I'm going to be doing for the draft study here. And once you've completed all that, just hit save at the bottom of this section, and then we'll go on to the next section. So the next one here is our training and testing. And so similar with the observation description, where you're kind of describing how the observation should work, how many, when, all that information. This is a similar area where you're adding that for what the training and testing looks like for your project. So your reliability testing protocol, what does that look like? You can add that information in here. For the draft project that I had conducted, we actually went with sort of a 3-tier system where we had people completing a behavior click quiz, just a Google form that had little snippets of video of drafts. They completed that quiz essentially first. Once they passed that, then they went to a video reliability test. And so I had a number of pre-recorded videos that I had scored, and the observers watched those videos, scored those behaviors. And then once they completed those video reliability tests, then they went to doing live reliability tests. And the live reliability test, the way I managed it was using the point person at each organization. So there's one point person that was responsible for managing the project, and that's the person that they were testing against. Certainly, there's many other ways to do it. That's just the way, we felt was a rigorous way to do it for the draft project. Similar with the observation commitment, you also have a training and testing time commitment, so you can add the number of hours that it would take for training and testing observers. And this is per observer, and so this would be about 2 hours or so. And so this last section here is project materials. So I mentioned earlier, I showed that project materials in the project. We didn't have any in there in the project, but you can add those in your project. If you forgot to add them before you started this process, like I said, you can always jump back to your project, add them, and then go to that sync methods in the overview section right here. And so the project materials are things that you can add, like any other documents, images, videos, links. So I mentioned earlier that clip quiz that I used, a Google form quiz that had little snippets of behavior. You can have that embedded in your project. You can have that quiz right there available for your participants. And then the second to last section here is our study questions. And so there are 3 types of questions that you can have in your community study. There's an organization question, animal question, and habitat question. So I'll walk through kind of each of those in turn. So the organization questions, these are basically, as it sort of sounds, broad questions at the level of the organization. These are sort of, think of them as kind of screening questions. So these questions that you put here, people need to complete before when they request access to join the project. So when they request access, they see your project, they're excited to join it. They'll request access to join the project. They'll then complete these questions here, and then you'll be able to see the responses to these questions when you're making that decision. Do you want to approve them to join your project or not? So you can kind of think of them sort of like screening questions there. And so for just an example, this wasn't on our draft study, but if we wanted to maybe look at just institutions that had a giraffe feeding program, you could have also had this in that project requirements earlier as well, but you can also add it here as a screening question here. So do you have a public giraffe feeding program at your institution? And you can just have question and responses of yes and no. And so you can see that creates that table and has that question in there. Animals. So this is similar, but this is specific to animals, and it's after they have already been approved access. So the organization, that's kind of a screening question before. Once you've approved access for them to join your study, their first step that they're going to be doing then is adding their animals to your study, to the project, and then they're also going to add their habitat to the project. And so that's what these next 2 questions are referring to, is all of the animals and habitats that they add to the project in their account. So as a basic question here that we would ask, let's put in, we can just ask, what is this animal's age? Just to be specific, in years, and then we can have a question type as number. You can certainly ask a lot more questions there about animals as well. And then for the habitat question, let's just ask a common one here. What's the size of your animal's habitat? So and so similarly, you can just create that question. You can add that there. And then whenever they add a habitat to the project, they'll be prompted to answer any of these questions. And you as the PI will then have all of this information there. And then the last step here is sharing. And so there are 3 different levels of access that you can give people, or 3 different levels of access of how people can view your project. So the most open is open here. So this is basically anyone can view, any ZooMonitor admin can view your project. So earlier when I showed you that Sea Dragon project and the draft project, that Sea Dragon project was actually open sharing. So any ZooMonitor admin anywhere in the world would be able to see that project and could request to join that project. The next level of access here is restricted. And so if you're creating a project and you only want to share it with your specific accreditation group, you can select restricted here, and then you can select your accreditation group in here. And then the last one here is private. And so if you only want to share it with specific users, so let's say you've already had discussions, you've already started forming a multi-institutional project, you have some members on board, and you don't necessarily want this to be visible, that anybody could see it and request access to join it, you can do this private access option here. And so if you were to do this, what you get is a private invite code that you can either through ZooMonitor, you can directly email that to other people. You can add them to that project where it'll email that code to them, or you can just copy that code and then personally email them or share that invite code. And then they can then go in and add that code into ZooMonitor, which would unlock their ability to view the project. Still not joining it, they would be able to view the project, and then they would still go through and request access to join the project, which would prompt them to answer those organization questions I just showed in the previous tab. And then the last step here is to decide your level of identification. So we have it defaulted to anonymous. You can also do identifiable. So of course, identifiable gives you all of your identifiable information. As the PI, you would be able to see that for all of your participants. If you were to select anonymous, which we do recommend, because honestly, in a lot of cases, you might not need to know necessarily like who Zoo 5 is or Zoo 6 is. It's really about the behavior of those animals and all of those other questions that you've asked. All of that information is still tied to that zoo. So you might not necessarily need to know some of that additional levels of privacy there. And certainly for having anonymous, that probably gets more people interested to join your project because there are concerns about sensitivity and data privacy there. But you do have those options. You can certainly do identifiable or anonymous. And if you were to do anonymous, the fields that basically get pseudonymized, so it's not fully anonymous, it's a pseudonymization, which is a hard word to say, which is why we call it anonymous, is the organization name, the animal names, observer names, and habitat names. So those fields all get that pseudonymization to it. So basically, there'll just be a unique identifier for that organization, that animal, that observer, whatnot, in your data set. And so we can click here. So it wants me to do this as restricted because I think I clicked restricted earlier. So we can go ahead and click save. And then our next step is to review and publish the project. So it's not yet published, and I'm not going to publish this project. This is just for demo purposes today. But you can see what you do right before you publish it is you go through, you have to click check project. It will run through every section and make sure that you've completed all of those sections. There's a lot of sections in there. And so if you forgot to complete one section, it would flag that for you here, and you would be able to jump back to that section to complete it. And then the final step here is just confirm that you're going to be using the ZooMonitor community in accordance with our community guidelines, which you agree to when you join the community section or when you first join the community area. And basically the key part here is that you're not going to be sharing identifiable data of participants without their prior consent. So that's a really important piece of trust for you as a PI, but also with the community, ZooMonitor community. And so before you share any identifiable information, you are responsible for reaching out to any of your participants and making sure that they consent to that sharing and whatever process that looks like for those participants. And so you'd click that, and then you would click publish. And like I said, I'm not going to be doing that for this project here. And so that's it. So that's basically the steps there of creating a community project. You can see there's certainly a few steps here. You can pick this up and come back to it later. You certainly don't need to do this all in one sitting. So if you want to just get it started, add a few pieces, come back to it later, add a few more, you can certainly do that. If your project is not published, so these are only projects that would be published and either open, or if it's restricted, it's within your accreditation group. You can go to view my studies, and you can see here is where your unpublished studies are. And so this is that study we just created. You can see its status is unpublished. This is all the information that we added in here. Our species, our study duration, expected time commitment, project requirements, all of this information that we just added. You can see it all populated here in your project page. So you can be able to preview your project page before you publish it, which is nice. And then I mentioned those project approval materials. You have a button there. And so anybody, once you've published it, anybody that's interested in joining can click that and view any of those project approval materials right there on the front and center on your project. So that's it. So that's basically the steps to create a community study. So I'm going to be doing other demos about other aspects of it. There's certainly a lot of other pieces that are super exciting about how you manage your participants, exporting the data, working with these large multi-institutional data sets, but those are going to be in future videos. So I hope you found this video helpful and look forward to seeing you in our next demo. Thanks. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked that video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to be notified when we release more videos. If you have any questions about ZooMonitor, you can always feel free to contact us at ZooMonitor@lpzoo.org. Thanks.